Welcome to the Daily Objective, day 93 of the war in Israel. Today we're talking about Israel's disastrous day after plan. Now, we have to qualify this with this is not an official plan, but it is the defense minister who suggested it. It's a four-point plan. Uh, it's bad overall. It's bad on each of those 4 points. We're going to discuss each of those 4 points. And I should again reiterate, I think it's not going to be easy to pass this in the cabinet, but it's not impossible, and I would say it's not unlikely. So I'm joined by Morgan. How's it going, Morgan?
Not too bad.
So your thoughts generally on this plan, and then we will go point by point.
Um, so when I first read it, I didn't think it was too bad considering how bad it could have been. However, saying that, then reflecting on the real kind of long-term needs for peace in the region, it doesn't really address the major things. Now, I think I might have a slightly more positive evaluation of it than you do, but I agree that there are some major problems with it, major flaws, and things which could really sow problems for Israel in the future. So that's my general overview from the beginning.
All right, so let's jump right into it. And this is from an article in the Telegraph 2 days ago. So I'm not gonna read the whole article. We'll just go point by point. So the first point, first, a multinational force led by the United States in partnership with European and moderate Arab nations will take responsibility for the reconstruction and economic rehabilitation of the enclave, the Gaza Strip. So, I mean, the first thing, I mean, there's a lot of things that bother me in that. The first thing that bothers me is the last partner here, which is moderate Arab nations. This is something we've been talking about a lot on the channel. The idea that, among many different types of bad, you find what is least bad, and then you pretend that it's good. It's one thing to do that, in certain contexts. Tomorrow on the reality show, we're gonna talk about the Republican candidates for president. It's going to be the Ayn Rand Center UK Republican debate. I think that's an example of where you pick among bad options, and you maybe should pick. But no, I don't think when you look at countries, Dubai. I'm going to give Dubai as an example. It's one of my favorite examples. Dubai is a country that Westerners love to invest in. They love to travel to. I've seen pictures and videos. It looks beautiful, Western, modern. Um, I think some people who probably love it less are, for example, the women Western women who visited Dubai, went to the police to report that they had been raped and got arrested because they had sex outside of wedlock, which is a crime, whether or not you consent to it. Dubai, again, this is one of the better countries in the Middle East. So these are going to be the partners, no doubt, even though it's not mentioned in there. I believe Qatar will be one of those countries. Qatar is the place where Hamas leaders are hiding. It's the place where it's the country that sponsors terrorism, possibly more than any other country per capita. All we need to do, and we're going to talk about this on the Daily Objective tomorrow, is watch their English language news propaganda channel to see where they stand. And like we talked about on Friday, it's much worse in Arabic, but it's uh, bad enough that you can see who they are. So that's my first problem and my biggest problem with that plan.
Yes, it's a good point. What exactly does a moderate Arab nation entail, and also why are they saying that? Why aren't they just naming the particular nations that they have in mind? And you're completely right. If it if what a moderate Arab nation means is Qatar, Jordan, even Egypt, countries like that, those aren't really the countries that I think Israel should really want to have in mind. Even if it's proper to call a country like Egypt moderate compared to some of the other ones out there. The thing that we shouldn't forget, and the thing which I guess I'm bringing up as something that needs to be involved in any long-term plan for peace, is that it needs to be something that addresses de-radicalization in the sense of it's going to need to address the anti-Semitism in the area. And any of these moderate Arab nations are going to have a high degree of anti-Semitism. Um, I mentioned the other day the Anti-Defamation League's Global 100, or yesterday, whenever I did, a few days ago, which, when it's found that 75% of the population in these kind of countries has anti-Semitic views, which is really, really high. So it's the thing that I guess filled me with foreboding about the involvement of moderate Arab nations is that actually there's going to be a lot of anti-Israel and anti-Semitic sentiment involved, which is not going to mean that they're going to operate in a way that behooves or that is beneficial to Israel. So yeah, I also share that foreboding. I also kind of worry about the involvement of the US and Europe here. Now there's going to be a multilateral international force that's going to aid in the reconstruction. And actually, I'll leave off that point because I'm prefiguring what I'm going to say about point 4. So let's continue.
All right, although I did want to touch on that. Yeah, it says that these countries will be responsible for the restoration and economic rehabilitation of Gaza Strip. What that means is also there's a question mark there. I mean, I think if you were going to rebuild the Gaza Strip for the people who are already there, which is something I, as you know, oppose, then why not build it as in a way that they would have to actually take care of themselves? So, you could say America or Europe or whoever will allow investments. People can actually work and build things that are not tunnels and rockets. But yeah, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about what Natan referred to on the reality show a few days ago as the socialism. The Gaza is a socialist place in essence, but a socialist place that survives off of the rest of the world. And yeah, that's so. The idea of restoration, economic rehabilitation bothers me. The people who will do it bother me. Even if it's the U.S. and Europe, it bothers me. Much more so, obviously, if it's Arab countries, which should not have a presence there. And yeah, as I've said, I support very much the idea of Israel resettling much of Gaza, with Israelis who want to live there, and that's that's the economic rehabilitation that I support for Gaza.
Yeah, well, much is in the way that after the war in Iraq and in some of these places, there was a kind of provisional government established by a coalition of forces. That some of the suggestion, although we're going to get on to who's going to be in control of Gaza in these next few points, if there's a kind of multilateral force which is taking part of the reconstruction, I presume they would have to be involved in some way, to some degree, in some of the local governance, at least early on. And presumably they're going to bring some military forces with them as well, or someone's going to be guaranteeing their security whilst they're there. And I guess instead of just holding off until point 4, I'm just going to, if there are forces from the US and European countries which come in as well, will they stand in the way of Israel taking military action if they feel they need to in the future? Is, I guess, what I was wondering about this point. Now, it's not even clear based on the plan as it's laid out, but it's something I think that you'd have to wonder about. If Israel needed to take military action, will these countries then stop Israel from doing that for fear of their people who are there, for any military forces that are there from these countries, and so on? So that's what I was wondering about when I was reading this point, and that's what fills me with a bit of foreboding about it.
Yeah, and the question is also, let me look at the wording again. So, a multinational force, what that means is also, is it military? I very much doubt that Israel will allow Arab countries, although I'm, constantly disappointed by what Israel allows, that they would allow actual armed, people from Arab countries into Gaza. So yeah, but very much you can very much expect when politicians put something together for it to be very vague in its language. Thank you, Bonnie, for the super chat. Thank you, Jonathan, for the generous super chat. You mentioned the Iraq War and rebuilding Iraq, and there was attempts to rebuild Afghanistan. I very much think we should look at those as great examples of what to absolutely never do again. Whereas, of course, it is being followed, and the way those wars were being fought is also being followed, and the result is not going to be different this time. All right, second point.
Sure.
Second, existing Palestinian administrative mechanisms will be maintained, provided that the officials within them are not affiliated with Hamas. Authorities that deal with health, sewage, electricity, water, and aid will continue to operate in collaboration with the new task force. So something, we've been talking a lot about UNRWA in recent days. Yeah, this is very much don't worry, UNRWA, the cash cow is safely in place and nobody's going to harm it. That's how I read that. And of course, not affiliated with Hamas. So there were reports from Israel in the past week or so that Netanyahu is considering giving some families in Gaza control. Now, these families are armed families that were allowed to operate under Hamas at the very least, if they're not affiliated with Hamas. We mentioned the white label idea yesterday. It's the exact same thing. You just take the Hamas logo off, and that's not okay. Those people should not be. Again, if you were in any way affiliated with Hamas, you should not be allowed to stay alive, let alone stay in Gaza and have power. So this is an amazing thing to come out of to even be discussed in Israel, and shows you how badly this war is being managed, if not fought. Because again, some of the aspects of how it's fought are better than what Israel has previously done, but the management of the war and what looks like to be the mismanagement of the day after is something really to fear, Morgan.
Yeah. Um, I guess the point is that any of the local administration that was going on in Gaza, whether they can't be there if they were affiliated with Hamas. And yet, for them to have been in the position before, Hamas would have had some involvement with them anyway. Presumably, would have had to have consented for them to be in those positions. If Hamas didn't approve of, so we spoke on the show a little while ago about the local mayor. Presumably, if Hamas didn't want him there, he wouldn't be there. He would be gone. So is he going to be allowed to stay in his position, or is he going to go? And does it have to be that he's a kind of loyal signed up member, or does it have to be that he had dealings with them, as presumably all of the local administration were, because Hamas controlled the area, so it was their administration basically. So what does that even really mean, that they can stay in place if they weren't affiliated with Hamas? That wasn't very clear to me. So that seems a bit vague. I appreciate that when you're talking about some kind of reconstruction for Gaza's future, that the inclination is going to be that you want as many of the local people involved as possible, because you're going to have any governmental force that's coming in is going to have a real difficulty on its hand, as was found out with Iraq and Afghanistan, because the locals really opposed them. I appreciate that there's going to be that difficulty and you want people on side, but if to address that problem, either you're just going to have to, I think, kind of brute force your way through that problem. It's not a good answer, but you might just have to do that. Or you're going to need to find the better people who may exist and get them on, the people who aren't anti-Semites, who don't want the continuation of war, people who are anti-Hamas. If you can find those people and you can get them into local administration, then that's what you want. But the people who are already there, presumably, aren't those people at all. So yeah, I also saw that as the second point and thought seems a bit confused, to be honest.
Yeah, now, as the article points out later, existing Palestinian administrative mechanisms, this certainly doesn't rule out the Palestinian Authority's involvement. And we spoke yesterday about how America, specifically America, because this was in a Wall Street Journal op-ed that we were discussing, was funding terrorism through the Palestinian Authority, and not just by through the money that the Palestinian Authority gives to Hamas, but also through the fact that as a Palestinian, if you have committed a terrorist attack, your family will get money forever as a reward for that. So yeah, if October 7 had been a real wake-up call and a real moment that Israel had decided this is never going to happen again, we're never going to be okay with terrorism happening again, none of these points would be there. And certainly nobody would consider any part of Palestinian administrative mechanisms to be something that can be kept. So
Yeah, yes, I suppose then the point is that Gaza needs to be kind of rebuilt from the ground up if you want it to be any kind of successful society in the future, and the existing structures need to go along with that, including the people who are in those positions, because they're going to be carrying the weight of what Gaza has been into the new Gaza. So yeah, I think that's a fair point.
third, where is it? So third, Egypt, a major actor in the plan, will retain responsibility for the main civilian border crossing into Gaza in coordination with Israel. All right, now there's nothing new here. And so what this means is the the border between Egypt and Gaza, which of course, nobody checks what goes through there. There are tunnels, without a doubt, that uh, if you need to move things or people between the two, you can do easily. Uh, that's what we've that's what we've experienced. That is a big part of what the arms or the material for the arms that the Palestinians have did not come through Israel or almost none of them came through Israel. We can say that with certainty. They came from Egypt. So the idea that this should remain is again the idea, if especially if Israel doesn't have a permanent presence in Gaza, and we will get to that in the fourth point. What that means is they can keep getting things in. Israel will eliminate much of the problem in this military operation, and then step back and then let it happen again. And what is Israel going to do if they have information that things they don't want entering Gaza are entering through Egypt? Uh, According to this plan, I don't see how they can do anything.
Yeah, and so I think people should remember and not forget that. I guess it was a few months ago now, but in the early parts of the war, or at least when the first temporary ceasefire was called, or whatever they ended up calling it, um, thing Egypt was a very sympathetic partner to the Gazan cause, and Palestinian fighters who were trying to escape were obviously trying to escape into Egypt, and Egypt could have done far more to have hindered Hamas's efforts than they did. There was how many other thousand gallons of fuel which went missing on the border of Egypt with Gaza. So Egypt isn't exactly the ideal partner that you want involved in this. And I guess a lot of the tone for the deal is the kind of typical politicians' way of thinking about these kind of things, which is where you need to compromise in some way. When people talk about politics as being the art of compromise, they don't mean compromise between two reasonable positions, both of which have a part of the truth, and you kind of retain the good parts of both and dissuade with the rest of it. They mean compromise between any two rival positions, no matter how good or bad they are. And so what you see is, Egypt has to be involved no matter how bad Egypt actually has been in relation to Israel in the past or has been in the last few months. They have to be involved because they have some kind of claim that Israel needs to make adjustment to. So that way of thinking, I think, pervades the whole language of this deal, the proposed deal.
We spoke about how, just like in 9/11, when the immediate rhetoric after the attack was strong, the American people were very much behind doing what needs to be done. The same happened in Israel. The Israeli people were behind doing what needs to be done. The Israeli leadership's rhetoric in the first few days was so different from what we see today, and we've seen it deteriorate over time. It wasn't overnight. So one of the things in the first few days that Israel said to Egypt was, if you send any fuel trucks to Gaza, we will bomb them. Of course, since then, Israel is allowing fuel trucks into Gaza, knowing that that fuel is fueling attacks on soldiers, knowing that that is killing Israelis. Israel allows it. So during a war. So after the war, when Israel is no longer there, again, what this does is it absolutely guarantees that Gaza will be a place that out of which the murder of Jews will continue to come out, whether it's any troops that may be there, or whether it's attacks against civilians in any form that they are, whether it's rockets or attacks like October 7th, which again, I think is likely to happen again the way Israel is looking at this. Any any points, anything to say on that or on the third point before we go to the fourth one?
I something general came to mind, but I can leave that to the end maybe.
All right, so let's look at point four. Fourth, Israel will retain military control on the borders and the right to take military and security action inside Gaza where deemed necessary. Now, I don't off the top of my head remember, but it very, very much sounds like what Israel said when they left Gaza in the first place and ended the occupation 17 and a half years ago. You know, we're leaving, but we maintain the right to defend ourselves in any way we need to. Whether it would be at the same level as it has been since 2005, whether Israel intends to take minor military operations when something major happens in Gaza, it doesn't that those you know that's not a distinction that's worth even noting. It's if anything should have been learned from October 7th is again that Gaza cannot be allowed to continue to exist as it did until October 7th. And part of that is that a permanent military presence in Gaza is required. And this goes back to point actually all 4 points, which is yeah, Israel's presence should be uh, throughout Gaza, should be military, should be civilian, and should be permanent. Israel shouldn't say this is the transition and this is what's gonna happen, over months or years. That's it. Gaza is now it belongs to Israel.
Yeah. So this point, I think is basically is the best point in the sense that it's good to see Israel asserting its need and right to take military action in Gaza if it needs to. But your point is a good one in the sense that this is what they've said, which is this is the right which has been asserted before, and yet when Israel is following through on that, what comes down on them when they exercise it is a cavalcade of criticism and slime from the international community who don't recognize their right to do that at all, or at least they recognize their right to do it whilst undercutting them whilst doing it. And then just going back to the point I made before, given that there's going to be some kind of transitional, provisional government going on in their reconstruction efforts, if what we saw, so just as a bit of context, Israel said, I think it's in the last 24 hours, that they've destroyed Hamas completely in the north of Gaza and they're focusing efforts on the middle and the south. Now, let's say by the time this plan comes into action, that Israel has eradicated Hamas in Gaza. Now, I think they said that in 2021, didn't they? So, but let's say they actually do it this time. And there's no credible infrastructure for Hamas, the tunnels, and there aren't any real Hamas militants left there. They've all fled abroad. They're in Qatar, wherever. Now, let's say somehow you see Hamas in some way re-emerging in Gaza in some small way, and Israel decides it needs to go in and assert this point for needs to assert its right to take military action. And there's all these reconstruction efforts going in, done by the US and Europe and whoever, and the moderate Arab nations. Will their presence mean that the US, Europe, and the moderate Arab nations are going to basically not allow Israel to take that action? Because any forces from those countries in Gaza at the time would be obviously in immense danger. So there's no clear answer as exactly either way, but that's a question that's thrown up that needs to be answered for this point to actually mean very much. So that was the thing that I thought when I saw this.
Not to mention, again, if this is a non-military force, and Israel does need to go in because of whatever reasons. I mean, we know the reasons, we just don't know the specifics in advance. And do you think the terrorists that are no longer calling themselves Hamas will not hide behind civilians. So just imagine, Israel killing 10 Qataris because the terrorists hid behind them and the uproar over that. So yeah, this is it's just it's shocking to see these kinds of plans if you give politicians the benefit of the doubt and say they actually want to find a way to do things right and they understand the diplomatic constraints and so on. It's less shocking if you don't give them the benefit of the doubt and you say, you know what, I think these people actually know that what they're doing is going to be disastrous and they don't care, or it's not their top priority. Um,
Yeah, well, I mean, so in this, just I don't know if we said this, but this plan has been proposed by, and I'm sure you'll correct me on the pronunciation, Yoav Galant, who's the defense minister, who seems to be widely touted as a future PM once Netanyahu's gone, and seems like a popular figure. You'd have to tell me whether that's right or wrong, but he seems like a popular politician in Israel at the moment.
I
Um,
mean, yeah, he's popular because everybody's so bad that anybody who seems a little bit less bad, and I think he does seem a little bit less bad, looks popular. So
yeah, so this is a plan proposed by a potential future prime minister of Israel, and we'll see how people react to this. I haven't seen what the reaction in Israel has been to the proposal so far, but and it also seems to have been made with a plan that's being proposed by Egypt at the moment in mind, in the sense that the reporting on this has noted how symmetrical Galant's plan is with the proposed Egyptian plan. Um, and I've completely lost my train of thought. There you go. But yeah, so whether he doesn't care or not, I don't know whether he doesn't care, but I think um, again, I think politicians think, well, I'll take what I get. I have to compromise somewhere, and they kind of don't. At least from the outside, it seems like they aren't really doing the pushing that they need to do for Israel's self-interest here, because, as we point out, there's a lot of vagueness here. And again, what I would like to have seen here, because if this is a proposal for a real long-term future, there needs to be discussion about how is the de-radicalization of Gaza going to take place. Because that's going to be really difficult, and I don't envy them the task of doing that. But how you get, because again, this is ultimately motivated by the hatred of Israel and therefore the hatred of Jews and the wish to eradicate the whole country and all the people from the landmass, from this area. So how are they going to stop people believing that? That's going to be really difficult, and they need to talk about that. And there isn't enough discussion of that, I don't think.
yeah, and again, I go back to UNRWA because that's who's going to be in charge. And are you gonna fire everybody in UNRWA and bring other people? And who will those other people be? Anybody who is likely to want to go, if they're not locals, to want to go to Gaza and help in the reconstruction is probably not going to be somebody who opposes the idea that, October 7th was the Palestinians breaking out of their prison or however they put it. So yeah, that's important to discuss. We will continue to discuss this, in the various aspects of it and the reasons why, you know, everybody seems to be getting this wrong on every level. One of those reasons is Al Jazeera, who we will talk about tomorrow. Thank you, Matt, for the super chat. Matt says, would you do an episode on libertarians' favorite foreign policy expert, Scott Horton? He's despicable. Do you know who Scott Horton is, Morgan?
I've come across the name, but I've never looked into him. No, I haven't.
I will have to Google him, and yeah, there's a chance that I'm going to be away in a couple of weeks, so people who are not away can talk about libertarians. Yeah, I mean we talk about a lot of despicable people here, and again, I don't know that like when I think of libertarians, I think of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire was it that tweeted the uh, images that Hamas had of Israeli hostages when they were released, looking at them and say, yeah, so yeah, many libertarians are despicable. We might do an episode at some point why libertarians need philosophy, because yeah, getting some things right on taxes or whatever doesn't mean you are a decent human being, and libertarians often are not. Some are very nice, but yeah, that is not always the case. There was a question in the chat, who pays for the reconstruction?
That's a
We
good
all
question.
pay. We all pay for the reconstruction in coin and in blood. I mean, this plan is going to be costly to all of us.
Yeah,
Thank
and
you. Just I want to quickly thank John for gifting 5 Ayn Rand Center UK YouTube memberships. So 5 people have just randomly been selected in the chat from memberships. They will have that membership for a month. Thank you. That's a very nice way to support our work. Yeah, thanks, John. And Morgan, you had some final thoughts.
Yeah, well, just why are we troubling ourselves so much from the last few months on discussing Israel so much? Not just because it's in the news or whatever. It's because there's something really important going on here, which has ramifications for all of us who don't live in Israel. And it goes to the heart of the nature of how people think about justice and how people are going to basically enact plans which affect people here in the West. Now, there's ramifications in the sense that if people aren't standing up to Islamic totalitarian terrorist regimes, then we know very well in the West what happens when those groups are allowed to flourish. But if our response in the West to these kind of things is fraught with contradictions, is basically rooted in unjust thinking and in altruistic morality, where we consider the well-being of people who are governed by Hamas, for example, before we think about people in Israel, then we're going to have real problems on our hands. And so that's why we're troubling ourselves with covering Israel for the main part, but also why this plan needs to be better than it is. And basically, Israel needs to assert its self-interest much more. And the condemnation, so I said earlier, I haven't seen some of the response in Israel. I've seen the response in the sense that Smotrich, and again, you'll have to correct me on the pronunciation maybe, but has condemned the plan and said he's not going to support it. And if it's people like that who are the only ones who are asserting that Israel needs to be stronger in asserting its self-interest, then you have a real problem.
Yeah, and as I said, the Smotrich Ben Gvir plan is much more to my liking than this idea. Um, Tomorrow's Republican debate, which just to make it clear, when we call it a Republican debate, it will not feature any of the Republican candidates. I know that I'm sure they're all watching every episode we do, but we haven't invited them to participate. We will have a few of us speaking about who we prefer. I think just from seeing recent comments on the channel, I'm sure at least I am going to piss a lot of people off. So that alone is worth watching. And it's worth watching live if you can. It's 6 p.m. UK time, 1 p.m. Eastern, because we will have some live voting. We want to know what the audience thinks about this, about the candidates, about the debate, about where they stand on the different issues. So I hope people will join us for that. That's one of our rare non-Israel topics, although we will talk, of course, about where the candidates stand in relation to Israel. And before that, on the Daily Objective, we will talk about Al Jazeera. So yeah, I think it's time for me to go spend about 23 hours watching Al Jazeera nonstop. I'm sure that will be great for my mental health and well-being. And I hope everybody joins us back here tomorrow at 5:30 UK time. Thank you, Morgan.
Pleasure.
Right at the end of the show. Thanks, Morgan. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
Absolutely.